Well, it finally happened. The St. Louis Cardinals have made an honest-to-goodness transaction in the form of a trade on Thursday. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is still Thursday, February 6, 2025. It's the evening hours at this point as we are breaking down a Cardinals trade. That's right. The Cardinals have completed a trade. No, it is not Nolan Arenado. Sorry. But it is a move that adds a player to the 40-man roster as the Cardinals have traded, well, they traded money for Michael Helman from the Minnesota Twins. He is a utility man, infield/outfield, and he's got a little bit of major league experience. Not much, but I can bet you he's going to get more of it this year. Michael Helman, 10 at-bats, took last year with the Minnesota Twins, went 3 for 10, but mostly spent the season at AAA St. Paul, where he put together a pretty respectable batting line. 271 average, 350 on base, 487 slug for an 838 OPS. But here's the key. He's a 28-year-old infield outfielder, right? He's a utility man, 28 years of age, just finally got his first cup of big league coffee, and therefore is not a prospect. He's not the type of guy that you would look to protect and make sure he's getting at bats in AAA, right? This is a very targeted move that, you know, we could talk about it. We'll get into the details and what we think of it. But off the cuff, I do think this one is something that makes sense for the Cardinals with the way that we talked about their bench coming together the other day in an earlier episode this week. I feel like there was still a spot where we said, well, you could fit Jose Fermin in there. You could fit, do they want to go Saggese? Like, we were kind of wondering, well, what's that going to look like? Ideally, it's somebody that can play multiple positions. I didn't think it had to be a right-handed bat, but Michael Helman is one. And look, just because the Cardinals have traded for him doesn't mean he's on the opening day roster, but I think there's a pretty good chance of it, specific to the role that he's going to fill. As long as he checks out in spring and does an okay job, I think he's got the inside track, to be honest with you, on an opening day roster spot, pending everything else going on. Yes, I do think that is contingent still on the Arenado thing coming to fruition and him being traded. That obviously clears another spot because it moves Gorman into the starting lineup more regularly instead of basically on the bench or as the DH. So that could be part of it, but Michael Helman is the name to know as the Cardinals have acquired a player. They did it. They made a trade. It's not a free agent signing, but they did technically spend money because it was cash considerations that they sent to Minnesota in the trade. So we can all take a sigh of relief. The Cardinals didn't go the entire offseason without making a transaction. If you're still waiting, though, for a bona fide free agent signing, keep waiting. Don't hold your breath. It could happen. It could come. I think if it happens now, though, it'll come in the form of a relief pitcher a little bit later on down the road, probably after spring has begun. Could be a possibility if the Cardinals see a market that is, dwindling on the days and there are players out there that they still believe could be contributors. And if you can get them for that, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 million range, maybe the Cardinals find it in their budget to do so. I do think they could use a right-handed reliever. But this trade for Helman does, I think, at least on paper, put the bench in a little bit of a different situation where you can sort of guess at what they're looking to do. So let me pull up the little roster matrix that I had begun to put together. And I say it out loud because I'm stalling to be able to find the darn thing. There it is. And we're going to add Michael Helman to this mix. I had a blank spot there that I just wasn't sure what to do on the bench. But Helman is somebody that I actually do think makes some sense for the role they're looking to have him fill. What does this mean for everybody else? Well, I'll give you the skinny on if Arenado's on the team and if he's not. If Arenado's on the team, all right, he's your third baseman. That bumps Gorman ostensibly to a DH role because I do think even if Arenado's here, Gorman's going to play regularly. The Cardinals are going to have to figure out a way to get Gorman as many ABs as possible. It's more about what he does at the plate than it is about judging him on his defense this year, if we can be honest. Because long-term, whether Gorman's a third baseman or he's a second baseman or he's an outfielder, it doesn't really matter. Nolan Gorman is going to make his hay if Nolan Gorman can take the 600 plate appearances, can keep his head above water when it comes to batting average, and can slug the 30 to 35 to 40 home runs that the raw power he possesses is certainly capable of doing. Offensively, you're looking at what Nolan Gorman can do in 2025. If Arenado is here, He's going to play a lot of third base. That's just a fact. Gorman's going to play a lot too. It's going to likely be more in a DH capacity and a second base capacity, right? That would end up shifting Donovan back to the outfield, which now you're looking at guys again like Jordan Walker. Is he going to be able to play regularly without the Cardinals kind of feeling compelled to hide him against certain matchups, or to play him less because they're not liking what they're seeing if he goes through a slump? I don't think Ollie Marmol is in a spot this year where he's going to go away from Jordan Walker, but I'm saying that on February 6th, right? Like, I'm pretty confident that they all know what this is and what this is going to be. But if you get deeper into the summer and the Cardinals are kicking around 500 or a couple few games above, do those daily decisions change from, yes, this is all about development and getting Jordan Walker the at-bats that he needs to ascend to the next level? Same thing with Gorman, same thing with guys like Ivan Herrera. Or does it turn into something different? I think it's going to be something where the Cardinals are on the same page about what this is going to look like. But Arenado's presence certainly makes it a little more complicated. But for now, we'll put Arenado at third. We'll put Gorman at DH. The rest of the lineup was Pages, Contreras, Donovan, Wynn, Newt Barciani, Walker. Now, if Gorman's around as more of a DH role because we see Arenado at third, that is going to put a little bit more of a squeeze on the catcher position, and it could lead to Ivan Herrera either not seeing as much playing time or he's going to catch more potentially, but they like Pages very much as well. So that's where it gets kind of interesting. But for now, we'll just note that one catcher is going to be in your lineup, one's going to be on your bench. I'll make it Pages right now as I map this out. That would put a bench kind of on a day-to-day basis. And again, Burleson is going to be officially on the bench, but I think he's going to play a lot. I just don't know exactly how it's going to shake out. And remember, last year at this time, or more like it in mid-March after they signed Crawford, we weren't really even sure that they had a spot for Burleson on the Major League roster, let alone in the everyday lineup. And ultimately, he finished the season as your primary number 2 hitter in the order. He was a regular. I think he'll be a regular this year. But for this purpose, Burleson, Luken Baker, right-handed bat off the bench, who doesn't really matter what position he plays, Pages as a backup catcher. You need that other guy to be somebody that can play just about everywhere. And that is basically the billing on Michael Helman, who is 28 years old. He'll turn 29 this season in May, but has played both infield and outfield. And I'm looking now through some of the more recent game logs. Let's give you 2024. Shortstop, 31 games. That's the first thing I say because it's the most important thing that the Cardinals, I think, needed somebody to be able to do. Could Brenden Donovan serve in that capacity on days that Mason Wynn needs off? Sure. I think he could do it. I have no question that he could do it. Do the Cardinals want him to have to do it? Probably not. Ideally, you'd have somebody else that could do that, and you can keep Donovan focused on second, third, left field, probably the 3 places he'll play the most. Maybe even he'd see a little bit of time at first base, as he did a couple of years ago, although that was more because of I think the throwing arm was bothering him before he ended up getting the surgery, basically the UCL surgery late on in the 2023 season, if I'm not mistaken, is when that was. Yeah, so shortstop is something that if you're going to pick somebody up, it needed to be, like, again, I'll be real with you. I had never heard of Michael Helman before today. At least I don't think I did. But when I looked at him, immediately I'm seeing the boxes that he checks off for the Cardinals. 264 innings at shortstop last year. That's in AAA. Is he any good at it? I have no idea. But it doesn't really matter. He's going to be backing up Mason Wynn. Mason Wynn is going to play almost every day. I know that last year they had to bake in a lot of off days for Mason Wynn. You got to understand that was, his first real full season in the big leagues. There's a longer, grind to what that entails than anything he had ever experienced before. And he began the season with a back injury that happened in spring training that he had to try to manage throughout at least the first half of the year. You look toward the latter portion of the season, he was pretty much ready to go every day, and we heard less and less about Mason Wynn getting the days off and having the back situation flare up. He just played, and I think that's what you're mostly going to see this year. But in the event that Mason Wynn should need a stint on the IL, whatever the case might be, you do want to have other options. Now, I think in that case, the Cardinals might be more willing to thrust Brenden Donovan into a shortstop role if it was going to be every day. This is all kind of speculative right now, but that's kind of the way that I look at it. But if Michael Helman can be on the roster and he's somebody that played good amount of innings last year at short, he played 159 innings in center field, he played 40 or so innings in corner outfield spots, played 98 innings at third, and played a few games at second base as well. He played just about everywhere last year. And at the big league level, little bit of third, mostly outfield, though. I think that's really all the Cardinals need out of that last bench spot. And I don't think this spells great things for Jose Fermin. It kind of feels like the goal for him was that the Cardinals could get him to play more outfield. And then they went out and got a Michael Helman, who is basically Jose Fermin, but maybe a little bit more capable at shortstop. Like, the Cardinals have not played Jose Fermin at shortstop, and there have been opportunities to do so over the last few years, and I still don't think he's logged an inning there in the big leagues. And the last time I checked this, I know he hadn't, unless he snuck it in late in the 2024 season. I still believe that is the case. Now, Fermin is younger, 25 years old compared to 28, going on 29, and Fermin turns 26 in March. But again, I think it's just that comfort factor with shortstop. Do the Cardinals have it? Or are they going to basically say, hey, let's add? And look, Fermin's somebody that he played 225 innings at shortstop in Memphis last year, too. So it's not that necessarily I know for sure that Helman's going to be a better defender, but the Cardinals went out and got him. And I think he's another guy that is basically going to compete with Fermin. Because otherwise, and I'm agreeing with the Cardinals doing this, I like Fermin. I like that he had really good numbers in AAA last year. He had superior numbers to Michael Helman if you compare their AAA stats from last year. Jose Fermin was over 900 on the OPS. Helman was in the 830 range. At the big league level, we didn't see very much from Jose Fermin. We have not gotten much of a sample size on Helman to know what we should expect from him. But it feels like it's a spot that is important, right? Like, you're kind of talking about the Brandon Crawford spot from last year, and I think you're going to see Jose Fermin and Michael Helman both play a pretty good deal of shortstop during the Grapefruit League in days that Mason Wynn's either not playing or he's left the game after a couple innings. I think they want to get a look at both these guys, and that, to me, stands out as a competition for the last bench spot, Helman and Fermin. I could be totally off base about this. The roster numbers could change. You could have injuries, and both guys end up making the team. I have no idea. But just in terms of, like, the skill sets, again, this is all just reading on paper about Helman. I just found out he existed today. But I think that's sort of what you're looking at, is a guy who, you know what, last spring we remember it. We remember thinking, man, what happens if Mason Wynn goes down? And then Mason Wynn kind of did go down a little bit. There was I was down there in Jupiter when this happened. There was a couple days where he was not participating, and it was the back. And then, when you get a chance to talk to him, he said, oh, everything's good. Just needed, just kind of flared up on me. But ultimately, it's something that did follow him into the season, and I think is a reason that the Cardinals ended up scrambling to sign Brandon Crawford a little bit later that spring when they did, because they kind of realized we got to have somebody with some experience at that position. And maybe you would, in another circumstance, be willing to let Brendan Donovan take that over. But you have to, it's kind of like, all right, it's a hypothetical situation right now because Mason Wynn's not hurt. But then it becomes, when you see the back tickle start to happen for Mason Wynn, it's less hypothetical and more like, shoot, do we really trust Brendan Donovan every day at shortstop? And I think Brendan Donovan could probably, he could have played a better shortstop last year than Crawford did. No offense, but we watched it, and he shouldn't have been in the position that he was in. Really nice guy, great clubhouse guy, didn't have it anymore. And we all kind of saw that. But the Cardinals were like the veteran presence, the experience of having played shortstop at a high level for a long, long time, rather than, having to thrust somebody into the role that they didn't really know what they were going to get in the event that Mason Wynn should miss significant time. And thank goodness he never really did with the back. But they managed it. And I think the Cardinals probably deserve more credit than criticism for how they managed the Mason Wynn thing. In the moment, we all had a lot of questions about it, but looking back on it now, in terms of just the long-term availability and durability and health of Mason Wynn, I think they managed it, and they got him through the season, if nothing else. And Wynn seemed very confident back at winter warm-up a couple weeks ago that the back wasn't even a topic anymore. And he said if it ever becomes one again, we know how to handle it and manage it and get through it because we learned a lot about it last year. So I think everything's going to be all hunky-dory as far as that's concerned. But that whole experience last year, I think, put the Cardinals in a position to where, yes, Arenado has been priority 1, 2, and 3, but they've also been probably scouring this market a little bit to say, can we find that guy? Can we find, again, you check the boxes. Can he play all these positions? Maybe they preferred it to be a right-handed bat. Can it be a guy that's not going to cost a lot? They didn't even have to pay a player to get him. It was just cash considerations in the trade. So that checks the box. Even though they don't want to really be spending money, I'm sure it was a small amount of money, right? Like you got a guy going on 29, It's not to say that the Twins were ready to DFA him, but maybe they were. Maybe they needed a roster spot, and the Cardinals, had the connection to be able to say, we'll just pay you $100,000 or whatever it ends up being, and we'll take the rights to the player so that you don't have to go through that process. This guy had solid numbers last year in AAA, but like I said, a non-prospect in terms of being a 28-year-old going on 29. It's kind of in that Luken Baker bucket a little bit, where I would say Luken Baker is more close to a prospect status, but even still, he's 26, going on 27, I believe. And the way that I'm viewing him for this year is it's okay to maybe block the trajectory of Luken Baker as being going to be a bench guy this year at the big league level. And I think nothing would make him happier. My point is he's advanced enough in having those minor league at-bats under his belt that he doesn't need more seasoning at AAA. It's time to find out whether Luken Baker can play at the big league level, even if that's in more of a niche role coming off the bench. I think that's exactly where Michael Helman is as well at this point in his career. And bully for him, he can play just about every position on the diamond, so that's going to help his viability to be able to get this done. But it's like the Cardinals had a checklist, and they, Michael Helman came out of the computer or made in a lab to be the exact role that they need for the 26 man on the roster. Jose Fermin has a lot of those similar characteristics, and he's a guy that's been around the organization. It's a big spring for Jose Fermin. It might be a do your business or get off the pot type of spring for Jose Fermin. Now, with the Cardinals, they'll decide if and when that should ever come to fruition. But let's say it's a spring where Fermin doesn't really impress and he's back to AAA to begin the year. There's only going to be so many times throughout the season where, as you need roster spots, a Quinn Matthews is ready, a Tink Hence is ready, whatever the case might be, that you look around and say, all right, if we've got a Michael Helman and he ends up winning that job out of camp, Fermin does a lot of the same things, maybe doesn't need the 40-man roster spot to be devoted there. So I feel like this is kind of a sink or swim. And even for Helman, I mean, it's not like the Cardinals gave up a lot to get him, and they don't have, previous ties to this player. So it's some much-needed competition for Jose Fermin, because I don't think Fermin at this point in his career, based on what he has demonstrated at the big league level, should just automatically walk into camp and it doesn't really matter what he does, and he gets a job. I like Fermin, but I think that, in the fairness of the Cardinals trying to be as competitive as possible, that's a good, healthy area to have competition. To have a couple of, utility guys who are kind of in that journeyman territory a little bit, and either of them has a chance to win a major league roster spot. I think that's more than reasonable, rather than feel as though, the Cardinals should have just devoted the spot to a guy. Now, you want that kind of competition for the end of bench roles. It's just a little bit different than the types of competition we're used to seeing, right? Like last year it was, wow, Victor Scott is really making an impression. Okay, there's an injury. Can he be the everyday center fielder? And the Cardinals decided, yeah, we're going to at least give him that chance. And then, he wasn't able to hit at the beginning of his big league career, went down to Memphis, came back up, and now is maybe a little bit more seasoned and ready to embark upon 2025 for that role. But this is very different. Neither Helman nor Fermin are really fighting for the everyday lineup, but I think there's an interesting little bench competition that could end up brewing throughout the spring, and I'm looking forward to that. And it's something, right? It's something to talk about. It's something to analyze and to think about. But as I was looking at the roster, I think that's what I came upon. I've got Burleson, Luken Baker, Pedro Pages, and then one more bench spot, and I think you could pencil in Helman or Fermin into that last spot, with the caveat of that's if Arenado's on the team. If Arenado's not on the team, I can go back to putting Gorman at third. I can go back to putting Ivan Herrera at the DH spot. And again, if it makes you feel better, let's put Burleson there just to demonstrate that he's going to play a good amount. We'll put Pages back on our bench. Then you kind of have another spot you can play with. Would they need a Helman and a Fermin off the bench? Probably not. Those guys, I think, similar skill sets, a little bit redundant. At that point, would you like to be able to maybe have another left-handed bat? You wouldn't necessarily need it, because you'd have Burleson, Ciani, Nootbaar, Brendan Donovan, and Gorman as your lefties. However, I think a lefty would fit if we were devoting a spot to Baker, which I want to do. I want to see Luken Baker make this team, barring the Cardinals signing somebody, which I don't think they should do. If they're about development, I think it's time to see if Baker can develop into a threat off your bench. It's okay if he's not an everyday first baseman at the big league level. I think he would just be glad to make the team, and I think he can be serviceable in the role. So I would devote a spot to Baker. Granted, I think he has to have a passable spring, but I'm a little more willing to say, yeah, let's see what that looks like. We saw a little bit of it late last year. I think that can vibe with what this year's roster is going to look like. There is a little competition going on with Siani and Victor Scott. I think in the event that Siani wins the job to be the everyday center fielder, Scott starts in Memphis. If Scott outplays him, Scott probably is your regular center fielder with Siani getting some run, but also Siani is a really nice fourth outfielder and guy to be on your bench. If Siani wins the job, Victor Scott's in Memphis, that puts Matt Koperniak squarely on the good side of the roster bubble, in my opinion, in the event that Arenado is traded, because another outfielder is what you could find useful in that spot. Now, with Helman, he can play it, so you don't need it to be an outfielder, but I could see it making sense. And all of this could change based on injuries, based on other things that we are not necessarily anticipating at this point in time, but that's sort of the way that I see it breaking down. Baker, Koperniak, Pages / Herrera, whoever's not playing, / if Herrera is your DH, then maybe it's Burleson, whatever. You've got 10 full-time players, and I think they're going to really find a way to try to make it 10, and a lot of people would say, well, Pages can be your backup. Pages is going to play. It's not going to be every day, but Pages is going to get enough run that it's not going to feel like a backup catcher to a starting catcher relationship. It's going to be a 1A, 1B, and Avon is going to get a lot of DH run. That's the way I predict it. But Baker, Koperniak, Helman / Fermin, and Pages could kind of be the bench makeup. You know, because I think with Brendan Donovan in there, you've got enough versatility, flexibility, where he can play a few different spots to make your infield make sense, to make your outfield make sense if you had to. Helman can do that as well. He's got to be able to hit, and Fermin might outperform him in spring, and then Fermin would have earned the job, and I think would be better for it because, you know, he felt the pressure of a little bit more, which is maybe a silly thing to say. Fermin at this point, probably regardless of who's on the roster around him, knows he's got to perform to make the team. That should at least be his mindset. So I don't know that changes his mentality all too much, but I do think it sets up a kind of fun little roster battle between Helman and Fermin to see what that looks like. The name I haven't mentioned in this podcast yet is Thomas Saggese. I would say that even in the event of an Arenado trade, this is bad news for Saggese unless there's an injury. The Helman trade basically locks Saggese, in my opinion, and I could be wrong about this. Saggese could plug into that Koperniak spot and they could go a little heavier on the infield. But I think you sign, or I should say trade for Helman. You traded cash, but it's not a signing. I think you trade for Helman, to push Fermin and say, we're going to get the best player of those two, the most ready player of those two on our bench to begin the season. That makes us a little bit better. But I think the other reason is you want to make sure that Thomas Saggese can be developed. You don't need to rush Thomas Saggese onto the big league bench so that he could sit 5 days a week and just back up, win occasionally. Because the other guys you're trying to get in the lineup are Gorman. Donovan's going to play. I mean, he's one of their best players. Jordan Walker's going to play, so that means that if Donovan is playing in order to shift him into the outfield, you can't remove Jordan Walker. Nootbaar playing more center would change the dynamic of that. I don't know that they're going to do that. We'll see. That's another storyline that it will be worth monitoring. We'll ask about it day 1, day 2, and we'll see as that develops. It's something to maybe watch for. How much does Nootbaar play center? Because certainly you have a chance to have a better offensive 1 through 9 if it's Newton center than Siani, but we'll have to wait and see. But with Saggese, I think if they don't anticipate having him be able to start 4+ days a week at the big league level, I don't think they probably house him on the major league roster to begin. He can force that issue by playing like his hair's on fire in the Grapefruit League, and maybe that shakes it loose and allows him to kind of make that decision more difficult on the team. But I think but then if there's an injury, if a Donovan or a Gorman goes down, Saggese goes from like a very, very big long shot to make the team to he's almost guaranteed to be on the team. Because I think the main priority for him is he's going to play every day. He leapfrogs a Helman into regular opportunity because he's a touted, a highly considered prospect. Saggese is more so than Helman. Fermin, those guys their futures are probably as big league bench bats if they're able to meet their ceiling. Saggese, I think, has a higher ceiling than that, and the Cardinals would certainly agree. So if there's an injury on the infield, and I didn't even say when, but mostly because I don't want to think about a world like that, but when Gorman, Donovan, if any of those guys should, have to hit the IL for any period of time, I think Saggese could probably slide right in at any of those positions. Saggese is another guy that's going to play a lot of shortstop in spring, like Helman, like Fermin, if I had to guess. The difference is Saggese would be the everyday shortstop if Wynn goes down. Like, that's why you're playing him at short, is to go, can he be the everyday shortstop if Wynn goes down? Let's just call him up and do that, rather than Helman fits maybe can back him up once every other week. Fermin can back up Mason Wynn once every other week. They're not going to hold Saggese for that role unless they thought he would get enough time at third and second as well to justify his place on the roster, which I just don't really think, with everybody healthy, is going to happen. But another thing that could be interesting is, like, what if Saggese plays really well and Gorman struggles? Would the Cardinals, and I've asked this question before, I don't think the Cardinals are bailing on Gorman prior to opening day, regardless of what happens in Jupiter. But I wanted to mention it because Saggese could absolutely tear up camp, and that would be interesting if he does and then doesn't make the roster because they don't feel like they have the playing time to devote to him. These are all hypotheticals. These are all things that are going to work themselves out, but it's early February right now. I'm still in St. Louis. I'm not in Jupiter yet. So these are the kinds of questions that we can toss around and at least bring up. We don't have to answer them today. That's the key. But that's Michael Helman. That's the trade the Cardinals have made with the Minnesota Twins. Let me know your thoughts on it, Cardinals fans. Is this one that you're excited about? Are you just glad they finally done something? Do you care? Do you not care at all? I think this is very low in terms of the register on the you should care about it meter, but it is notable because this was a roster spot that I was kind of scratching my head going, Fermin? Question mark? But maybe it's Helman, and I think that's going to be a competition in camp. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Thank you guys so much for listening, for your continued support. Check out the YouTube membership in the video description below if you'd like to join that to continue pushing me forward as we get this thing down to Jupiter, Florida. Have mentioned if you've got a business and you'd like to partner with me for some podcasts down in Jupiter or into the regular season, let me know. Hit me up via DM on Twitter. We can talk about any ideas, right? We had my guy Mark doing Down on the Farm last year. Down on the Farm, Mark has said, if somebody else wants to sponsor Down on the Farm, you should let him. Mark's really great. But like those sorts of things, I would be happy to incorporate into the podcast as regular features to get your business or whatever it is that you've got going on in life in front of Cardinal Nation, and let Cardinals fans that listen to this show learn about what you've got going on. So at b-schaeff 12, help me help you help me, and hit me up via DM on Twitter if you have anything on that front. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the show. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.